The people who change our lives are rarely the ones who arrive on time. They are the ones who choose to stay when everyone else leaves. The waiting room on the fourth floor of St. Andrew Medical Center had grown unusually quiet as evening settled over Chicago. Visiting hours had ended nearly 30 minutes earlier, and one by one the last families quietly gathered their coats, folded newspapers, emptied coffee cups, and disappeared through the automatic glass doors toward the elevators. The television mounted high in the corner played a muted news broadcast that nobody was watching anymore. A clock hanging above the reception desk marked each passing second with a gentle ticking sound that somehow felt louder than the conversations that had filled the room only an hour before. By 7:30 in the evening, only one child remained. A little girl no older than 7 sat perfectly still on a blue hospital chair near the windows overlooking the city lights. She wore an oversized pale yellow sweater beneath a cream-colored jacket that looked much too large for her small shoulders. A well-loved white stuffed rabbit rested quietly beside her, while an open sketchbook lay across her lap, with several colored pencils carefully arranged in a neat row. Every few minutes, she lifted her eyes toward the hallway leading to the operating rooms, watched the doors for a few hopeful seconds, then lowered her gaze back to the unfinished drawing in front of her. She never complained. She never cried. She simply waited. William Carter almost walked past without noticing her. At 46 years old, the millionaire CEO had spent most of his adult life moving too quickly to observe details that did not appear on meeting agendas. He had come to the hospital for a brief visit with one of his company's longtime financial advisors who was recovering after routine surgery. The visit had lasted exactly 12 minutes. His assistant had already arranged dinner with investors across town, and his driver was waiting outside the main entrance with the engine running. William checked the elegant watch beneath the cuff of his navy suit before heading toward the elevator. Then something made him look back. The little girl was still sitting exactly where she had been when he first entered the waiting room earlier that afternoon. She had not changed seats. She had not spoken to anyone. She had not even closed her sketchbook. William slowed his pace. He continued toward the elevator anyway. The doors opened. Several visitors stepped inside. He followed them without thinking. Just before the doors closed, he glanced once more through the narrowing opening and saw the little girl raise her head as another nurse walked past the hallway. Hope briefly appeared in her bright blue eyes before quietly fading again. The elevator door slid shut. William stood silently among strangers while the elevator began descending toward the lobby. After only one floor, he pressed the emergency stop button, surprising everyone around him. "I am sorry," he said politely as the doors reopened. "I almost forgot something." He stepped back into the hallway and walked in the opposite direction. Minutes later, he entered the nearly empty waiting room once again. The little girl looked up in quiet surprise as the sharply dressed businessman slowly approached the empty chair beside her. Without asking questions, without checking his watch again, and without making a single phone call, William Carter quietly sat down beside the little girl. Outside the hospital, his driver continued waiting. Across the city, investors wondered why the meeting had not begun. Inside the waiting room, however, none of those things seemed important anymore. For reasons William could not explain, he suddenly felt that the most valuable place he could possibly be was the empty chair beside a child who had been waiting far longer than anyone should ever have to wait alone. William Carter remained quietly beside the little girl without saying a word. The silence between them never felt uncomfortable because hospitals carried a language of their own. Soft footsteps echoed through distant hallways. Nurses exchanged quiet conversations behind the reception desk, and every few minutes an elevator chimed before opening to welcome another worried family. The little girl continued coloring inside her sketchbook. With careful attention, occasionally glancing toward the hallway leading to the operating rooms before returning to the unfinished drawing. William noticed that every page contained the same scene. A smiling woman holding the hand of a little girl beneath a bright yellow sun. Each drawing looked almost identical except for one small detail. On every new page, the little girl had drawn herself waiting beside a different hospital chair. William finally smiled gently. "Those are beautiful drawings," he said. The little girl looked up with quiet surprise, as though she had forgotten someone else was sitting nearby. "Thank you," she answered softly. Her voice was calm, polite, and much smaller than the waiting room around her. William nodded toward the stuffed rabbit resting beside her. Does your friend have a name? The little girl picked up the well-loved toy and brushed one finger across its soft ear. His name is Oliver, she replied. Mom gave him to me when I was 4 because she said nobody should ever wait alone. William felt those simple words settle quietly inside him. He introduced himself with the same calm voice he used during important business meetings, although this conversation somehow felt far more meaningful. My name is William. The little girl smiled politely. I am Lily. They sat together for another minute, watching the evening lights shimmer across the city beyond the large hospital windows. William realized he had not looked at his watch since returning to the waiting room. His phone vibrated inside his jacket several times, but he ignored every notification. Investors could wait. Meetings could be rescheduled. Somehow those things suddenly seemed far less urgent than understanding why a 7-year-old child had been sitting alone for so many hours. A volunteer from the hospital quietly walked through the waiting room, carrying a tray with warm tea and small packages of crackers. She smiled kindly at Lily before offering William a curious glance. Would either of you like something to eat? She asked. William accepted 2 cups of hot chocolate instead. He carefully placed one in front of Lily, making certain it had cooled enough before handing it to her. Lily wrapped both hands around the warm paper cup and smiled with genuine gratitude. Mom always says hot chocolate makes waiting feel shorter, she whispered. William laughed softly. Your mother sounds very wise. Lily nodded proudly before taking another careful sip. She always finds something good, even on difficult days. William looked once more toward the hallway where nurses quietly continued moving between patient rooms. Are you waiting for your mom now? He asked gently. Lily's eyes followed his toward the closed hallway doors before she answered. Yes. She paused for only a moment before adding the words that explained everything without explaining nearly enough. I promised her that when she opened her eyes again, I would be the first person she saw. That is why I cannot leave this chair. William looked at the empty waiting room surrounding them, then back at the little girl holding her cup of hot chocolate beside the stuffed rabbit and unfinished drawings. In that quiet moment, he understood that she was not simply waiting for good news. She was keeping a promise that meant more to her than anything else in the world. Lily held the warm cup of hot chocolate carefully between both hands, as though the gentle warmth itself helped her keep the promise she had made. Oliver, the little white rabbit with one ear slightly bent from years of hugs, rested quietly beside her on the blue hospital chair. William noticed that every few minutes Lily reached over and straightened the rabbit before looking once again toward the hallway where the operating rooms remained hidden behind heavy double doors. She never asked how much longer it would be. She simply waited with remarkable patience that no child should ever have to learn so young. William leaned back in his chair and studied the waiting room around them. The overhead lights had dimmed slightly for the evening, casting a peaceful glow across the polished floors. The television continued playing silently while the receptionist organized paperwork behind the front desk. A janitor slowly polished the hallway entrance before offering Lily a familiar smile as he passed. It became obvious that several members of the hospital staff already knew her. She was not a stranger here. She was simply another brave little face that had quietly become part of the building. A nurse stopped beside them carrying a clipboard and smiled warmly. Hello again, Lily, she said gently. Your mom is still doing well. The doctors are taking very good care of her. Lily smiled with visible relief and whispered, Thank you. The nurse glanced toward William with quiet curiosity before continuing down the hallway. William waited until she disappeared before speaking again. Everyone seems to know you. Lily nodded. Mom has been here for several weeks. Sometimes I come after school. Sometimes on Saturdays. Miss Jennifer at the front desk lets me color while I wait. William looked toward the reception desk where the woman smiled and waved gently at Lily before returning to her work. You must know everyone here, he said. Lily shrugged with the simple honesty only children possess. Hospitals stop feeling scary when people remember your name. Those words lingered in William's thoughts. During the past 20 years, he had entered conference rooms where everyone recognized him because of his success. Yet he could not remember the last time someone had remembered him simply because they cared whether he was doing well. Lily carefully turned another page in her sketchbook and selected a light blue pencil. William watched as she began drawing the same waiting room once again. This time she added 2 chairs instead of 1. In the first chair sat a little girl holding a stuffed rabbit. In the second chair, she slowly sketched a tall man wearing a navy suit. William smiled with quiet surprise. Is that supposed to be me? Lily nodded without looking up from the page. You stayed. She said those two words as though they explained everything. No praise. No excitement. Just a simple observation that someone had remained beside her when they could easily have walked away. William found himself unexpectedly moved by how much meaning could fit inside such a small sentence. His phone vibrated once more inside his jacket. Without even checking the screen, he pressed the button that silenced every notification before placing the device deep inside his briefcase. Lily noticed the gesture and smiled. Now it will not interrupt our waiting. William laughed softly. No, he replied. It will not. For the first time in many years, the millionaire who had built his life around deadlines, schedules, and constant movement realized that the most valuable thing he could give another person required no money at all. It required only time, patience, and the simple decision to remain seated beside someone who should never have been left to wait alone. The clock above the reception desk quietly moved past 8:30, yet the waiting room felt suspended outside of time. The last visitors had gone home, the hallway lights had softened for the evening, and only the distant rhythm of rolling medical carts occasionally disturbed the peaceful silence. William noticed that Lily never asked the nurses for updates unless they came to her first. She trusted that someone would tell her when it was time. Until then, she simply remained faithful to the promise she had made. She carefully finished another page in her sketchbook before holding it up for William to see. This drawing was different from the others. The little girl and her mother still stood beneath a bright yellow sun, but now there was another figure sitting quietly on a nearby chair. The man wore a navy suit and held a warm cup instead of a briefcase. William smiled. I think he looks much kinder than I do. Lily giggled softly. That is because you have been here longer. Before William could answer, a volunteer walked into the waiting room carrying a basket filled with children's books and small puzzles. She greeted Lily with familiar warmth before noticing William still sitting beside her. You are still here, she said with pleasant surprise. William nodded. I decided this was the most important meeting on my calendar tonight. The volunteer smiled knowingly before handing Lily a picture book about stars and wishing them both a peaceful evening. Lily placed the book beside Oliver without opening it. William noticed her hesitation. Do you not want to read it? He asked gently. Lily shook her head. If I start something now, I might miss the moment the doctor comes. William quietly understood. She was protecting every second because every second felt precious. His phone vibrated again. This time the display showed more than 20 missed calls and several urgent messages from his assistant asking where he was. William stared at the screen for a brief moment before opening a single reply. Please cancel everything tomorrow morning. I will explain later. He pressed send, turned the phone completely off, and slipped it into his briefcase. It was the first time in years that he had intentionally disconnected from work without arranging another schedule to replace it. Lily watched him with quiet curiosity. Was that important? She asked. William looked toward the hallway where the operating room doors remained closed. It used to be, he answered honestly. Not anymore. Lily smiled and reached into the pocket of her cream-colored jacket. She carefully unfolded a small piece of paper that had been folded many times. It was not another drawing. It was a short note written in careful handwriting. Mom packed this in my lunch before coming to the hospital, Lily explained. She told me not to read it unless I started feeling lonely. William remained silent as Lily read the note quietly to herself before looking up with tears that never fell. What does it say? He asked gently. Lily smiled through the emotion warming her eyes. It says, Sweetheart, if someone chooses to stay beside you when they do not have to, remember them forever, because kindness always arrives looking like ordinary time. William lowered his eyes for a moment, unable to find words that felt worthy of such a simple truth. The waiting room grew quiet once again, but the silence no longer felt empty. Somewhere beyond the closed hallway doors, doctors continued their careful work. On one blue chair sat a little girl keeping a promise to her mother. On the chair beside her sat a man who had unknowingly spent his entire life searching for a reason to finally stop walking, and neither of them realized that before the night was over, both hearts would leave that waiting room forever. Changed. The night grew quieter as the hospital settled into its familiar rhythm after visiting hours. Outside the tall windows, the lights of Chicago shimmered beneath a clear autumn sky, while inside the waiting room the gentle hum of air vents and the occasional footsteps of nurses became the only reminders that time continued moving forward. William no longer thought about the meetings he had canceled or the business headlines he would miss the following morning. Instead, he found himself watching Lily carefully add another page to her sketchbook. Every drawing she created carried the same warmth that her mother had taught her to see in ordinary moments. This time she drew the waiting room exactly as it looked, the blue chairs, the large windows, Oliver resting quietly between them, and 2 cups of hot chocolate sitting side by side on a small table. William noticed that she had even drawn the clock above the reception desk. "Why did you include the clock?" he asked with a smile. Lily continued coloring the picture before answering. "Because tonight is important. I want to remember every minute." Her answer settled gently into William's heart. He realized that for years he had measured time by deadlines, quarterly reports, and flights leaving on schedule. Lily measured time by moments worth remembering. A nurse named Jennifer stepped into the waiting room, carrying a small blanket. She wrapped it carefully around Lily's shoulders before smiling toward William. "Thank you for staying with her," she said quietly. "Children become much braver when they know someone is beside them." William simply nodded. He did not feel like he deserved gratitude for doing something that now seemed so natural. Jennifer paused before adding, "Lily's mother has always spoken about how strong her daughter is, but even the strongest children should never have to wait alone." After the nurse disappeared back into the hallway, William looked at Lily. "Your mother must be very proud of you." Lily smiled softly. "She tells me brave people are not the ones who never feel afraid. Brave people are the ones who keep loving even when they are afraid." William leaned back in his chair and quietly reflected on those words. He had spent decades believing courage meant taking risks in business, making difficult financial decisions, and leading thousands of employees through uncertain markets. Yet the greatest example of courage he had ever witnessed was sitting beside him, wearing an oversized cream-colored jacket and holding a worn stuffed rabbit. A volunteer returned with a small tray of fresh cookies baked by a local community group for families waiting overnight. Lily carefully broke one cookie into 2 equal pieces before offering the larger half to William. "Mom always says sharing makes waiting lighter," she explained. William accepted it with genuine appreciation. It was the simplest gift he had received in years, yet somehow it felt more valuable than expensive presents exchanged at corporate events. Together they quietly watched the hallway doors, neither speaking for several minutes. Then Lily reached into her sketchbook, tore out the newest drawing with remarkable care, and handed it to William. Across the page she had written in careful block letters beneath the picture of the 2 blue chairs, "Nobody should wait by themselves." William held the drawing gently, realizing that what had begun as an unexpected stop inside a hospital had slowly become one of the most meaningful evenings of his life. Somewhere beyond the closed operating room doors, doctors continued their careful work, and somewhere inside William's own heart, years of hurried living were quietly giving way to something far more enduring. The simple understanding that the greatest kindness was often nothing more complicated than choosing to remain beside someone until hope finally walked back through the door. The hands of the large clock quietly moved past 10 in the evening, yet neither William nor Lily seemed aware of how many hours had slipped away. The waiting room had become almost completely still. Only a few dim lights remained above the reception desk, and the distant sound of rolling medical carts echoed softly through the peaceful hallways. Lily rested Oliver against her shoulder while carefully turning another blank page inside her sketchbook. Instead of drawing immediately, she looked toward the closed operating room doors with the same patient expression William had watched all evening. He admired how she never complained about the waiting itself. She simply accepted that some of the most important moments in life could not be hurried. A few minutes later, Jennifer returned carrying a gentle smile that instantly caught Lily's attention. She knelt beside the little girl and spoke softly enough that only they could hear. "Your mother is doing well," she said. "The surgery is finished, and the doctors are completing the final steps. She will need a little more time before anyone can see her." Lily closed her eyes for a brief moment and quietly whispered, "Thank you." William noticed her shoulders relax for the first time since they had met. The fear had not disappeared completely, but hope now carried more weight than uncertainty. Jennifer stood and smiled toward William. She has been incredibly brave. William looked at Lily before answering. I think she has been teaching me what bravery really looks like. Jennifer nodded knowingly before returning to her work. For several peaceful minutes, neither William nor Lily spoke. They simply watched the hallway together. Eventually, Lily broke the silence. Do grown-ups ever get scared? She asked. William smiled gently. More often than we admit. Lily tilted her head with curiosity. Then why do they always pretend they are not? William considered the question carefully before answering. Maybe because they think being strong means hiding it. Lily hugged Oliver a little closer. Mom says being strong means telling the truth and still choosing hope. William quietly laughed. Your mother has taught me more tonight than many people have taught me in years. Lily smiled before beginning another drawing. This time she did not draw only herself and her mother. She carefully sketched 3 figures sitting together beneath a bright hospital window. One held a stuffed rabbit. One held a warm cup of hot chocolate. The third simply sat beside them with empty hands and a peaceful smile. When she finished coloring, she slid the picture toward William. Across the bottom she wrote in careful blue letters, "Waiting is easier when someone stays." William gently folded the drawing and placed it inside the inner pocket of his suit jacket instead of his briefcase. He wanted to keep it close to his heart. At that moment, the hallway doors slowly opened, and a physician stepped into the waiting room carrying a calm, reassuring expression. Lily immediately stood, clutching Oliver tightly, while William rose beside her without saying a word. The doctor smiled warmly before speaking. Lily, your mother is awake. She asked the nurses the very first question she promised she would ask. She wanted to know if her little girl was still waiting. Lily's eyes filled with joyful relief as she whispered the answer almost to herself. I told her I would be here. William quietly watched the little girl take a deep breath before following the doctor down the softly lit hallway. And in that unforgettable moment, he realized that keeping a promise could sometimes heal 2 hearts at the very same time. William remained standing in the hallway as Lily disappeared beside the physician, her small hand wrapped securely around Oliver while hope carried her forward with every step. He watched until the hospital room door quietly closed behind her, then slowly returned to the same blue chair where the evening had begun. For the first time in many years, he felt no desire to rush toward the next obligation. The waiting room was almost empty now, yet it no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Jennifer walked over carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee, offering one to William before sitting across from him for a brief moment. She made it, William said quietly, almost as though he needed to hear the words aloud. Jennifer smiled warmly. Yes, she did. Her mother asked about Lily before she asked about herself. That is the kind of love that helps people heal. William nodded, reflecting on everything he had witnessed throughout the evening. Lily never doubted she would wake up, he said. Jennifer folded her hands together. Children sometimes believe in hope more naturally than adults do. They remind us what faith looks like before life teaches us to become afraid. Those words settled gently into William's thoughts. A few minutes later, the hospital room door opened again. Lily stepped into the hallway with bright eyes and the widest smile William had seen all night. She hurried toward him, carefully remembering not to run inside the hospital. When she reached him, she threw her arms around Oliver before stopping in front of William with quiet excitement. She smiled at me, Lily whispered. The first thing Mom said was, "Thank you for keeping your promise." William felt his own smile grow without effort. "I knew you would," he replied. Lily shook her head. "No. She thanked you too." William looked at her with gentle surprise. "Me?" Lily nodded. "I told her I was not alone because someone stayed with me." Before William could answer, a nurse approached and smiled. "Lily's mother would like to meet you for just a minute, if you have time." William followed the nurse down the softly lit hallway until he reached the hospital room. The woman resting comfortably in bed looked tired but peaceful. She reached out her hand with quiet gratitude. "I do not know your story," she said softly, "but I know my daughter. She does not trust easily. The fact that she smiled tonight tells me everything I need to know." William gently shook her hand. "She was the brave one," he answered. "I only kept her company." The woman smiled. "Sometimes company is the greatest gift." After wishing her a smooth recovery, William quietly stepped back into the hallway, allowing mother and daughter to enjoy the reunion they had both waited for all evening. As he prepared to leave, Lily hurried after him carrying her sketchbook. She carefully removed one finished drawing and placed it into his hands. It showed two blue waiting room chairs beneath a large hospital window. One chair held a little girl hugging a white rabbit. The other held a man in a navy suit sitting beside her. Above the picture, she had drawn a bright yellow sun shining through the glass, even though it had been night outside. At the bottom, she had written one simple sentence in careful block letters. "Thank you for waiting with me." William folded the drawing with extraordinary care and placed it inside the inner pocket of his jacket, realizing that every award, every contract, and every business success he had ever collected suddenly seemed much less valuable than a child's handwritten reminder that sometimes the greatest difference a person can make is simply choosing not to leave. Several weeks passed before William returned to St. Andrew Medical Center, yet the memory of that quiet evening never truly left him. The carefully folded drawing Lily had given him remained inside the inner pocket of his Navy suit, traveling with him through board meetings, business flights, and conference halls across the country. Every time another demanding schedule threatened to consume his attention, he would unfold the picture of the two blue chairs beneath the bright yellow sun and remember that the most meaningful investment he had ever made required neither contracts nor signatures. On a cool Saturday morning, William walked back through the familiar hospital entrance carrying nothing more than a small canvas bag. The receptionist recognized him immediately and welcomed him with a warm smile. Jennifer stepped out from the nurse's station moments later, pleasantly surprised to see him again. "Someone has been asking whether you might come back," she said. William smiled quietly before following her toward the pediatric waiting room. Lily looked up from her sketchbook the moment he entered. Her face brightened with unmistakable joy as she carefully set Oliver aside and hurried across the room. She stopped just in front of William and smiled proudly. "I knew you would visit again," she said. William laughed softly. "You seem very good at knowing when people will come back." Lily nodded with complete confidence. "Mom says people who stay once usually remember how." William handed her the canvas bag. Inside were fresh colored pencils, thick sketchbooks, watercolor paints, and a new white stuffed rabbit wearing a tiny blue ribbon around its neck. Lily admired every item with wide eyes before gently hugging Oliver and the new rabbit together. "Oliver needed a friend," she whispered happily. William looked around the waiting room and noticed several other children sitting quietly beside worried family members, each carrying the same uncertain expressions Lily had worn weeks earlier. Without thinking, he placed the remaining sketchbooks and art supplies on the community table near the windows. Within minutes, children who had been sitting silently began gathering around to draw together. Parents smiled gratefully as quiet conversations slowly replaced anxious silence. Jennifer watched the scene unfold with tears warming her eyes. "You have changed this room," she said softly. William shook his head. "Lily changed it. I only remembered what she taught me." Later that afternoon, Lily's mother slowly walked into the waiting room with steady steps, her recovery progressing better each day. She paused beside William before looking at the children happily coloring together. "For weeks," she said gently, "this room felt like a place where families counted difficult hours. Today it feels like a place where hope has somewhere to sit." William quietly looked toward Lily, who had already begun helping a younger child choose the perfect crayon for a bright yellow sun. He realized that kindness had quietly multiplied without anyone planning it. A single evening beside one lonely child had become an unexpected gift for many others. As sunlight poured through the large hospital windows, William unfolded Lily's original drawing once more before carefully placing it beside the new artwork filling the community table. The picture of two blue chairs no longer represented only one unforgettable night. It had become a reminder that every waiting room, no matter how uncertain, could become a little brighter whenever someone chose to remain beside another person until hope finally arrived. 1 year later, the fourth-floor waiting room at St. Andrew Medical Center looked brighter than anyone remembered. The same blue chairs still lined the windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The same clock continued marking every passing minute above the reception desk, and families still arrived carrying quiet hopes for the people they loved. Yet one remarkable difference greeted everyone who stepped inside. Along the largest wall stood a welcoming corner filled with colorful bookshelves, sketchbooks, puzzles, watercolor paints, soft blankets, and comfortable chairs where children could read, draw, and simply feel less alone while they waited. Above the entrance hung a small wooden sign that read, "The Promise Corner." There was no large company logo beneath it. No photograph of William Carter. Only one simple sentence engraved into the wood. Nobody should wait by themselves. William visited every month without announcing his arrival. Sometimes he brought new art supplies. Sometimes he simply sat in the same blue chair where everything had quietly begun. Nurses smiled as they passed. Volunteers greeted him by name. And children often wandered over carrying unfinished drawings they wanted someone to see. He never hurried those conversations. He had learned that the greatest gift a busy person could offer was unhurried attention. Lily and her mother returned regularly for follow-up appointments. But those visits slowly became celebrations instead of moments of fear. Lily had grown taller, yet Oliver the white rabbit still rested beneath her arm wherever she went. One sunny afternoon, she ran toward William carrying a carefully folded picture with the same excitement she had shown on the night they first met. William smiled before opening it. This drawing showed the familiar waiting room once again. The blue chairs remained beneath the large windows. Children laughed around colorful tables, and volunteers read stories while parents smiled with quiet relief. Near the center of the picture sat one man in a navy suit beside one little girl holding a stuffed rabbit. Above them, sunlight poured through the windows in the shape of a golden heart. Along the bottom of the page, Lily had written in careful handwriting, "You kept your promise too." William gently placed the drawing beside the first picture she had ever given him, both protected inside matching frames hanging near the entrance of the Promise Corner. Every family entering the waiting room paused to look at them, not because they were extraordinary works of art, but because they reminded everyone that hope often begins with something wonderfully ordinary. Months later, during a business interview, a journalist asked William what had become the most successful investment of his career. The audience expected him to describe a company acquisition, an innovative technology, or an international partnership worth millions of dollars. Instead, William smiled quietly before answering, "The best investment I ever made was an evening I never planned." The room grew silent. He looked down at the framed drawing resting on his desk and continued, "Money can build beautiful rooms, but only kindness can make people feel less alone inside them." Long after the interview ended, those words continued traveling far beyond the walls of the hospital. And every evening, when another worried child quietly entered the waiting room carrying fear, hope, or a beloved stuffed animal, there was always a comfortable chair, a welcoming smile, and someone willing to stay beside them until the waiting no longer felt like something they had to carry alone. True wealth had never been measured by what William owned. It was measured by the moment he chose to remain seated beside a little girl who simply needed someone to stay.